He thought she was just trying to scare them off, but when he followed her into the forest, what he found buried beneath the snow made his heart stop. Welcome to the channel. If this tale of instinct, courage, and second chances moves you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep sharing emotional stories inspired by the wild. Thank you. Let's get back to the story now. The first time the bear appeared, no one took her seriously. It was early spring in Pine Hollow, a quiet village tucked between misty mountains and dense, whispering woods. The trees still held patches of snow in their shady hollows, and the wind rolled down from the peaks with a chilled hush. Most mornings, the air hung heavy with birdsong, pine sap, and the warmth of wood smoke, but this morning was different. A silence had crept in, unsettling and strange. And standing at the edge of Claire Whitmore's fence line, nose lifted to the breeze, was a bear. A big one. She wasn't roaring. She wasn't charging. She wasn't tearing into garbage cans or clawing at livestock pens like some of the locals might have feared. No, this bear was just there, staring. Claire spotted her from her kitchen window, her teacup halfway to her lips. Her eyes locked onto the shadowy shape just beyond the pasture. Brown, broad, massive, but not threatening. If anything, she looked tired. Her head hung slightly, her breathing visible in soft huffs against the chilly air. Claire set her cup down and stepped outside onto her porch, clutching her cardigan closed. The bear didn't move. A full minute passed. Then, slowly, she turned her head, not toward Claire, but toward the northern tree line. She let out a low, drawn-out grunt, paced in a short circle, and then looked again in the same direction before plodding away on heavy feet that made no sound in the grass. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because the bear came back. Again the next morning, and again the one after that. Each time, the routine was nearly identical. She would emerge from the woods at dawn, lumber toward the edge of the village, stand near Claire's property, or sometimes the fields behind old Mr. Langston's barn, and just wait. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't growl, wouldn't move toward anyone. She just paced, circled, and stared out toward the trees with the look of something caught between urgency and grief. It didn't take long before the whispers started. "She's sick," muttered one man at the diner. "Lost her cubs, maybe. Gone mad. I saw her near the schoolyard," another woman claimed, staring right at the building. "My nephew said she followed him part way home. They need to shoot her before she mauls someone." Claire didn't agree. Not yet. There was something about the bear that didn't sit right, not in a way that stirred fear, but in a way that stirred her memory. She'd grown up in Pine Hollow, raised by a mother who had worked as a wildlife biologist for the Forest Service. Bears weren't strangers to Claire. She learned early how to read their body language, how to track them, how to know when a bear was being aggressive and when it wasn't. And this bear, no matter how often she returned, never showed aggression. She looked like she was trying to communicate something. That strange behavior, the repeated visits, the circling, the head gestures, it wasn't random. It was too deliberate. As if she wanted someone to follow her. As if she needed someone to follow her. By the fourth morning, Claire was out before sunrise. She'd set up her trail camera facing the path the bear took, hoping to capture her movements from the night before. And just as she'd anticipated, the bear arrived, emerging from the fog, broad-shouldered and silent. She stopped just past Claire's fence and turned toward the same section of trees. A single grunt escaped her chest, a low sound, full of something that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite warning. Claire stepped onto her porch. The bear turned to look at her. Their eyes met again, deep-set, amber-brown. And behind them, sorrow? She didn't know what possessed her, but Claire walked out past the gate, a slow and steady pace, arms relaxed at her sides. The bear didn't move, just watched. Then she turned again toward the trees. Her paw lifted. She took a step, then another, then stopped and looked back. That was the moment Claire knew. This wasn't just instinct. This wasn't aimless wandering. The bear was trying to show something, led someone. But before Claire could follow, a sharp blast from a truck horn shattered the silence. Mr. Langston was driving his pickup down the dirt lane, his old mutt barking wildly in the back. The bear flinched, looked between Claire and the approaching noise, and then bolted back toward the woods, vanishing into the shadows like smoke caught in the breeze. The dog's barking didn't stop until the truck did. "Claire," Langston called. "You out of your mind walking toward that thing? That's a grizzly. You want to end up like the Prescott kid last fall." Claire didn't answer. She just stood there, staring into the place where the bear had disappeared. The villagers had seen enough. By that evening, the community board was lit up with angry posts. Fear was a powerful spark, and it caught fast. The mayor's office received calls urging immediate action. Kids weren't allowed to walk alone to school. Wildlife Services was contacted. A decision was being made, one Claire knew she had to stop before it was too late. She spent the night reviewing her trail cam footage, and what she saw sent chills down her spine. In the video, timestamped just before sunrise, the bear could be seen emerging from the trees. But she wasn't alone. She was nudging something. Something limp. Something small. A cub. But it wasn't moving. The footage was grainy, and the snow distorted the image, but Claire froze the frame, zoomed in, and her breath caught. The bear had carried a cub to the edge of the woods and laid it down. It wasn't alive. It wasn't whole. Claire sat back, heart pounding. This was grief. This was mourning. The bear wasn't trying to harm anyone. She was trying to get help. Or, perhaps more heartbreakingly, she was trying to show someone what had happened, crying out in the only way a wild animal could. It made sense now, the pacing, the returning, the searching. She wasn't lost. She was desperate. And Claire had a new purpose. Tomorrow, she would follow the bear, no matter what the town said. She had to find out what was hidden in those woods, and why this mother bear kept returning. Because something was out there. Something she hadn't seen yet. The next morning, snow had blanketed the cabin overnight, smoothing out the chaos of the day before with a deceptive calm. Owen sat at the kitchen table, nursing a half-cold mug of coffee, staring out the window with heavy eyes. He had barely slept. The image of the bear's eyes still lingered in his mind, not wild, not threatening, but intelligent. Intentional. Something about the way she had moved around the cabin haunted him. She wasn't aimless. She was trying to say something. Show something. But what? Suddenly, a low sound pierced the quiet morning. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a tree creaking under the snow. It was a deep, throaty huff, the unmistakable sound of a bear. Owen's body tensed. He stood quickly, knocking over the coffee mug. Hot liquid spilled across the wooden table, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the window. She was back. The bear stood at the edge of the trees again. Her massive form looked weaker than the day before, but her posture was alert. Her head was raised, ears slightly forward, as if beckoning him. Behind her, the cubs were barely visible, nestled in the snow, clearly exhausted. Owen didn't wait this time. He grabbed his coat and stepped out into the cold. The air hit him like a wall of ice. Snow was deeper than yesterday, crunching under his boots as he made his way forward. The bear didn't move. She just stared. Not at him, but past him, toward the cabin. Then she took a step back. And another. Then she stopped, looking over her shoulder. She wanted him to follow. Every instinct in Owen's body screamed against it. But something else pushed him forward. Trust. Curiosity. An inexplicable connection. He took a step toward her. Then another. The bear turned and began moving slowly into the woods, limping worse than yesterday, yet clearly purposeful in her direction. The cub stumbled behind her, barely keeping pace. Owen followed cautiously, unsure of what he was stepping into. They moved slowly, cutting through the dense forest, branches heavy with snow hanging low. The silence was eerie, interrupted only by the occasional snap of a twig or the crunch beneath Owen's feet. The trail they followed curved along the edge of a frozen creek, then dipped into a shallow ravine. The bear navigated it with practiced difficulty, pausing every few steps to wait for her cubs. Owen kept his distance, but didn't stop. Eventually, they came to a place where the snow looked disturbed, packed down, stained, and scattered with broken sticks and shredded bark. The bear stopped and turned back toward Owen. Her breathing was labored. She looked at him, then at a small, twisted pile at the base of a tree. Owen hesitated before approaching. As he neared, his breath caught in his throat. It was a third cub, smaller than the others. Still, silent. Its fur was partially matted with blood and ice. Owen knelt beside it, realizing it was alive, but just barely. Its shallow breaths puffed visibly into the cold air. The poor thing was injured, likely during the same attack that wounded the mother. It must have been left behind, hidden for safety while she went searching for help. That's what she was trying to tell him. This whole time, the bear hadn't come for warmth or food. She hadn't come to beg or threaten. She had come to lead him here, to this forgotten, dying cub, to give it a chance she alone couldn't offer. Owen didn't know what to do. He had no training in wildlife care, no vet nearby, no plan. But as he looked down at the tiny creature wheezing in the snow, and then up at the mother, watching him with a gaze heavy with hope, he knew he couldn't walk away. Carefully, he took off his coat, wrapping the cub inside. It stirred weakly, its head nudging at the warmth. Owen stood, cradling it in his arms. The mother bear didn't move. She just watched, her eyes locked on his. Then she turned, and with her remaining strength, began leading the way back toward the cabin. This time, Owen wasn't alone. This time, he walked with purpose, the cub close to his chest, and a story unfolding in the snow behind them that no one would believe, except those who knew the language of survival, sacrifice, and the quiet roar of a mother's love. The door creaked open, and Owen stepped back into his cabin with the injured cub wrapped tightly in his arms, its faint breathing the only reassurance that life still lingered inside. The heat from the fireplace was a blessing, instantly thawing the ice that clung to his beard and fingers. He gently lowered the cub onto a folded blanket near the hearth, layering it with another to trap the warmth. The cub whimpered, a tiny sound, like a newborn gasping for breath. Owen crouched beside it, his hands shaking not from the cold, but from the crushing realization of what had just unfolded. He had been led across the woods by a bear who trusted him enough to bring him to her dying child. Nothing in his life, not even the loss that had driven him to isolation, had ever felt so surreal. He looked up, and there she was. The mother bear had followed him inside. Slowly, deliberately. Her massive frame filled the doorway, and the snow still clinging to her fur melted in thick drops that splattered onto the wooden floor. She looked at her cub, then at Owen. There was no fear in her gaze. No panic. Just fatigue and something deeper, something that felt like gratitude. Owen backed away, giving her space. She limped to her cub and curled around it, her giant paw draping over its tiny frame as if to reassure it one last time. You're not alone. The other two cubs shuffled in behind her, huddling in a tight ball near the warmth. Owen stood frozen, back pressed against the kitchen counter, not daring to move or speak. His cabin, his once sacred place of solitude, was now a sanctuary for a family of bears. Outside, the storm returned with a vengeance. Wind howled across the roof, rattling the windows like 1,000 unseen hands trying to claw their way in. Snow swirled in frantic spirals outside, erasing all signs of the trail they had followed. It was as if the forest had swallowed their journey whole, leaving them sealed in together, fate now tangled like branches in the wind. Owen moved slowly to the stove, pouring a pot of water to heat. He didn't know what to do for the cub. He had no antibiotics, no medical training, no wildlife experience. But he knew how to clean wounds, how to comfort, how to care. He had done it for his wife during her final months, when illness had taken over her body but not her spirit. He had sat by her side every night, holding her hand, telling stories, pretending everything would be okay, even when it wouldn't. Now he knelt beside a bear cub with that same energy. Soft, present, intentional. He dipped a cloth in the hot water, tested it on his wrist, then dabbed it against the cub's wounds. The little creature flinched but didn't cry. The blood was mostly dry now, clinging to the fur like rust. He worked carefully, his hands steady. The mother bear never moved. She just watched, her breathing slow and deep. Every few minutes, she'd nuzzle the cub gently, her nose pressing into its side to feel it still rising. As the storm raged outside, the hours inside seemed suspended in time. Owen found canned tuna in his cupboard and left a plate near the hearth. One of the other cubs sniffed it cautiously, then took a bite. Soon, the second joined. The mother didn't eat. She barely moved. Her eyes were constantly on the injured cub, who had stopped whimpering and now lay still, breathing, but barely. That night, Owen didn't sleep. He sat in his armchair by the fire, blanket over his lap, watching this strange family share his space. The air was thick with smoke, warmth, and something intangible, a sense of sacredness. As if the cabin had become a chapel. Every time the flames dimmed, he added more logs. Every time the wind howled, he whispered reassurances. Not to the bears, but to himself. He remembered something his grandfather once said when they found a fox trapped in a fence. Sometimes nature doesn't want to fight. Sometimes it just wants someone to see it. That memory hit him now with full force. The bear hadn't fought him. She hadn't run. She had shown him, led him, trusted him. At sunrise, the storm finally died. The silence that followed was thick and pure. The world outside was untouched again, smooth mounds of snow blanketing the earth like folded linen. Inside, the cub stirred slightly, its tiny paw twitching. Owen leaned in. The eyes fluttered open, just barely. But they opened. He smiled through tears. The mother bear saw it too. She shifted and let out a deep, vibrating breath, almost a sigh. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, she stood. Her body looked heavier than ever, her injury worse after the journey and cold. She sniffed her cub one last time, then turned toward the door. Her two healthy cubs followed, hesitating at the threshold. Owen didn't move. He simply opened the door. The forest greeted them with silence. The sky was still gray, but the storm had moved on. The mother bear looked back one final time, at Owen, at the fire, at the tiny cub still bundled in blankets. Then she stepped out into the snow, disappearing into the trees like a shadow. She had left her baby behind. Owen stood in the doorway, stunned. Why? Why would she bring him here, let him care for it, then walk away? He didn't understand. Not fully. But deep down, he suspected the truth. She had brought the cub to him because she knew she wouldn't make it. The injury, the cold, the storm. She had spent everything she had getting to his cabin, and she had done it not to save herself, but to save her child. That last look wasn't one of hesitation. It was a silent passing of the torch. A plea. Take care of her. For me. Owen closed the door, the cold wind pressing against his back. He walked slowly to the cub, who now blinked at him with tired eyes. He knelt beside it, gently cupping its head. You're safe, he whispered. I've got you. Outside, the forest stood still. Inside, something eternal had shifted. The morning light crept in through the frosted cabin windows, casting golden streaks over the wood floor where the small cub lay bundled near the hearth. The fire had burned low overnight, but Owen had stoked it several times before dawn, careful not to disturb the cub's fragile rest. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with meaning. He could still feel her absence, the mother bear. Though she had vanished into the forest just hours earlier, her presence still lingered like a spirit embedded in the cabin walls. She had entrusted her child to him. That truth hung in the air like a solemn vow. Owen moved to the cabin with practiced quiet. Every creak of the floorboard, every clink of the kettle on the stovetop seemed louder in contrast to the stillness. The cub, though weak, had survived the night. Its breathing had grown more regular, its eyes a little brighter. It no longer whimpered with every movement. Instead, it lifted its head when Owen approached, a soft, questioning look in its dark eyes, as if trying to understand who this strange two-legged creature was and why it felt warm and safe near him. He named her Willow. It wasn't something he consciously decided. The name came to him as he sat beside her, feeding her spoonfuls of water and bits of mashed banana mixed with boiled oats, soft food, easy to digest. Willow. It reminded him of trees that bend but don't break, of something delicate but strong enough to survive fierce winds. And that's what she was, this little bear that had been dragged across the wilderness by a dying mother's will. She had endured pain, cold, hunger, and loss, and yet here she was, blinking up at him like she hadn't given up on life. Owen set up a small area near the fireplace, converting it into a makeshift den. He used thick blankets, cushions, and a few old towels to create a soft bed. Willow curled into it easily, finding comfort in the enclosure. When she slept, she twitched small spasms in her paws, tiny growls in her throat, as if she was still chasing memories of her family through dreamscapes. When awake, she remained alert but calm, always watching Owen's movements with a growing familiarity. Outside, the forest remained hushed. There was no sign of the mother bear or her two other cubs. Owen watched the treeline every day, scanning for movement. He left food out, scraps of fish, boiled potatoes, bits of chicken. Sometimes the offerings disappeared, but he could never be sure what had taken them. Coyotes, foxes, maybe even the mother herself. He wondered if she was still alive. If she came close at night to check on Willow, leaving unseen footprints in the snow while he slept. He wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe she knew her daughter was okay. Days passed. Then a week. Willow grew stronger. She began to explore the cabin, her wobbly legs gaining confidence. She sniffed at furniture, nudged the edge of the rug with her nose, pawed at Owen's boots as if they were toys. Her favorite spot remained near the fire, where she would often curl up with a contented sigh that reminded Owen of the way his dog used to settle beside him in the evenings. That dog, Scout, had been gone for years. But in Willow, something of that spirit had returned. A sense of companionship, trust, innocence that hadn't yet been crushed by the world's cruelty. One night, as Owen sat in his armchair reading, Willow crawled up beside him. She tried clumsily to climb onto his lap but was too big for that already. Instead, she rested her head against his leg and let out a low, comforting sound, a kind of hum. It wasn't quite a growl or a purr, but something in between. He reached down and stroked the fur along her back, feeling the warmth of her body beneath his palm. It was the first time he had touched her without gloves on. Her fur was coarse, but beneath it, her skin was soft and thin, like a newborn's. He looked down at her and whispered, "I'm not letting anything happen to you." He meant it. But reality crept in like the cold that slipped under the doorframe. This wasn't sustainable. He couldn't keep a wild bear cub forever. As much as he had grown attached to her, he knew she belonged to the wilderness, to her own kind. He had to find help, people who could rehabilitate her properly, teach her to survive in the wild when she was ready. But who would believe his story? Who would trust a man who lived alone in the woods, claiming a bear had brought him her dying cub? Still, he had to try. He hiked to the ranger outpost 3 miles away, trudging through snowdrifts with photos on his phone and Willow's story burning in his chest. The ranger on duty, a young woman named Carla, listened with skeptical patience. She flipped through his photos, asked questions, even laughed softly at the idea of a guardian bear. But something in Owen's voice, or perhaps in the quiet conviction behind his eyes, made her believe enough to come see for herself. When Carla arrived at the cabin and saw Willow, real, alive, and nestled near the fireplace like she belonged, her demeanor changed entirely. "This is incredible," she said, kneeling down to examine the cub from a distance. "She's not just alive, she's thriving." Owen nodded. "She has a name. Willow." Carla smiled faintly, then glanced around the cabin. "You did all this?" "I just kept the fire going," he said. Carla spent the rest of the afternoon observing Willow's movements, checking her limbs, her healing wounds, her weight. She was impressed. More than impressed, moved. She promised to reach out to a wildlife rehabilitation center 2 towns over, a place that specialized in orphaned cubs. But there was a waiting list. Protocols. Inspections. It would take time. "She's safe here in the meantime," Carla said. "You're doing good." Owen wasn't sure how he felt about that. He wanted what was best for Willow, yes. But the thought of losing her, of returning to the same deafening silence that had once wrapped his life in grief, it scared him more than he expected. Willow had brought color back into his world. Purpose. Her eyes had become mirrors in which he saw a version of himself he didn't know still existed, a man capable of healing. A man who could still love. That night, as the fire crackled and Willow curled against his side, Owen knew the day would come when she would leave him, either by the call of the wild or by the hands of people better equipped to return her to it. But until then, he would be her den, her protector, her home. Because once upon a time, a dying mother had walked through snow and ice, not to save herself, but to deliver her child to safety. And he would honor that gift with everything he had left. The days that followed moved slowly, like honey sliding down the side of a jar. Each one bled into the next with quiet routines, Willow's feeding, Owen's fire tending, the long walks to the edge of the woods where he would pause and wait, searching for signs of the mother bear. The silence in the trees always answered back. And yet, something inside him refused to believe the mother was gone. He couldn't explain it. There was no logic to it. But Owen had lived in the forest long enough to know when it was trying to speak. And lately, it was whispering. On the 6th morning after Carla's visit, Owen noticed something strange on the far side of the clearing, 3 distinct tracks in the snow. They were fresh, not yet filled in by wind or drifting flakes. Bear tracks. But not Willow's. These were larger, wider paw pads, deeper impressions. The kind made by an adult female. His pulse quickened. Could it be her? He followed the tracks cautiously, leaving Willow curled by the fire. The trail led deeper into the woods, weaving through narrow thickets of snow-laden pine and around the frozen creek that cut like a jagged scar through the land. The prints weren't hurried. No signs of panic. Just methodical steps, steady and deliberate. It was as if she wanted him to find them. After a half-mile, the tracks broke suddenly. A wide area of trampled snow revealed where she had lingered, maybe even rested. And there, near the base of a frost-covered tree, he saw it, a scrap of cloth. His breath hitched. It was the same faded red bandana he'd worn during a fishing trip the previous summer. He must have lost it in the woods months ago. But what was it doing here? He picked it up, inspecting it with gloved fingers. It was wet, but unmistakably his. The realization dawned slowly. She had carried it here. Placed it deliberately. She was leaving signs. He followed the tracks further, now with a strange sensation in his chest. Not fear. Not confusion. Something more sacred. Like receiving a message across species. And as he reached a small ridge overlooking a snow-covered hollow, he stopped cold. There, lying beneath a cluster of leaning birch trees, were the other 2 cubs. They weren't moving. His heart plummeted. He stumbled forward, falling to his knees beside them. They were curled together, limbs stiff, eyes closed. One had its paw draped over the other, as if trying to shield it in their final moments. His hands trembled as he touched their fur. Cold. No breath. No heartbeat. Owen sat back in the snow, chest tight, throat burning. She had tried to save them. It hit him all at once, the truth behind her behavior. The desperate visit to his cabin. The repeated returns. The way she hadn't eaten the food he left out. It hadn't been for her. It had been for them. She had been begging for help, not for herself, but for her cubs. Leading him. Pleading with him. And now, he had been too late. Tears welled up in his eyes, hot and stinging in the cold air. He hadn't cried in years, not even after losing his wife. But now the sorrow came like a flood. For the cubs. For their mother. For everything that had been lost in the silence of this winter. He stayed with them for hours. Built a small cairn of stones over the frozen bodies, his gloved hands raw from moving rocks and ice. When it was done, he stood, heart aching, and looked back over the trail he had come. And that's when he saw her. Standing at the edge of the trees, barely visible through the falling snow. She didn't move. Just stood there, massive and battered, her breath misting in the cold, eyes locked with his. The old wound on her side had reopened, fresh blood staining her fur. She looked thinner now, goner. But her eyes, they burned with something ancient. Sorrow. Pride. Gratitude. He didn't know what to say. What do you say to a creature that entrusted you with her child? That led you to her fallen young not for sympathy, but remembrance? So he spoke softly, from the only truth he could find. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know. The bear blinked slowly. Then she turned, lumbered back into the trees, and disappeared. Owen returned home with a weight in his chest, but also a clarity. She had wanted him to see, to understand. Not just for closure, but as a witness. These woods weren't just her hunting ground or her shelter. They were her legacy. And now, a part of him had become its keeper. Back at the cabin, Willow was restless. She paced more, sniffed near the door, pawed at the glass. Owen didn't know if she sensed the change or simply felt her mother's absence more keenly than ever. That night, she didn't sleep by the fire. She curled up near the door instead, as if waiting. Over the next few days, Owen prepared. Carla returned, bringing supplies, including special formula and an insulated carrier. The rehab center had agreed to take Willow, but it would be another week before they could send transport. Owen wasn't sure he wanted to let her go, but he knew he had to. He began writing everything down, journaling each day in a leather-bound notebook. The first time Willow growled, the way she snuggled the corner of the rug, the tracks in the snow, the cairn, the mother's eyes. The story deserved to be preserved, not as a fairy tale, but as a record of something rare and real. In the silence of the evenings, he read to Willow from old nature books. It felt silly at first, but she listened. Her ears would twitch. Sometimes she'd tilt her head. It gave the cabin a rhythm, like she was learning who she was, not just through instinct, but through him. Owen made her a promise. No matter where she went, no matter how far, she would never be just a cub who wandered into a man's life one winter. She would be known, remembered. Her mother's sacrifice would not be forgotten. And so, in the depth of winter, a grieving man and a rescued bear cub sat beside a fire, bound by something more powerful than species or survival. They were family. The sun rose behind a thick veil of clouds, its light silvered by the snow still falling over the forest. It had been a full week since the mother bear's final appearance, her silent farewell in the trees, and though the ache of her absence lingered like smoke after a fire, Owen could feel the shift. The forest had quieted again, not in the way that meant emptiness, but in the way that comes after something sacred passes through and leaves its mark. Willow still slept by the door. Every morning, she stirred just as the sky lightened, placing her tiny paws against the cold glass as though waiting for someone she knew would never return. Owen no longer tried to coax her away. He sat beside her instead, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders, coffee in hand, watching the woods together as if to honor the memory of the one who had brought them both here. The call came that afternoon. Carla's voice on the other end was gentle but clear. The wildlife center was ready. A team of specialists would arrive the next day to pick up Willow and transport her to a larger rehabilitation sanctuary up north, one better equipped for her continued care. There, she'd have space to roam, trees to climb, and other young bears to bond with. The long-term goal would be reintroduction, returning her to the wild when she was ready. It was what her mother would have wanted. Owen sat in silence after the call, staring at the fading fire. His hand absently stroked Willow's fur as she dozed beside him. He had known this moment would come. He had told himself from the beginning that he was only a stop on her journey, a warm pause between chapters. But now that the next chapter had arrived, his heart ached with a dull, familiar sorrow. It was the same ache he had felt when packing up his wife's belongings, when locking the door of their city apartment for the last time. Letting go wasn't new, but it never got easier. That night, he didn't write in his journal. He couldn't find the words. Instead, he built a small fire outside near the edge of the trees, under the stars that blinked dimly through the clouds. He sat in the snow beside it, Willow curled in his lap like a dog, and whispered stories into the flames. Stories about her mother. About the first time he saw her limping across the ice. About the eyes that had met his through the storm and begged for something beyond fear. Willow made a soft sound in her sleep, a tiny grunt, and tucked her head against his coat. He didn't sleep that night. He watched the fire die slowly, ember by ember, and when the sky finally lightened, he stood up and went inside. The truck arrived late in the morning. A white van with the sanctuary's emblem printed on the side, tires crunching through the snow. Carla stepped out first, bundled in layers, followed by two handlers carrying padded crates and gear. Willow stirred but didn't run. She simply stood at the door, watching. Owen opened the cabin and stepped aside. "She's in there," he said, his voice low. The handlers approached gently, speaking in soft voices, coaxing Willow toward the open carrier. She resisted at first, pawing at Owen's pant leg, letting out a soft, uncertain growl, but he knelt beside her, cupping her face in his hands. "You're going to be okay," he said. "They're going to take good care of you. You're not alone." She blinked up at him, then, slowly, stepped inside the carrier. It felt like someone had pulled the gravity out of the room. Owen stood frozen as the door clicked shut. Carla placed a hand on his shoulder, but he barely felt it. "She'll be okay," she said. "You did something incredible." He nodded but didn't speak. The drive away was quiet. Owen stood at the edge of the clearing, watching until the van disappeared into the trees, its tire tracks the only sign it had ever been there. Snow began to fall again, soft and steady, erasing the lines as quickly as they had formed. He didn't cry until later. Not until he walked back inside and found the small pile of twigs Willow had been collecting near the hearth. She had taken to dragging in little sticks from outside, nibbling them, playing with them like toys. He sat on the floor beside them, picked up the smallest one, and held it like something precious. And then the tears came. For her mother. For the cubs. For everything he had lost and everything he had found in their presence. Winter passed. The snow began to melt in slow, steady drips from the cabin roof. The lake thawed along its edges. Birds returned to the trees with cautious songs. And Owen found himself rising earlier, walking further, not with the desperation of grief, but with a quiet kind of hope. He still wrote in the journal. Every day. Pages filled with memories of Willow. Sketches of her curled beside the fire, notes about the day she took her first steps outside the cabin door, lists of food she preferred, berries over salmon, oatmeal over greens. One day, a letter arrived. It was from the sanctuary. Typed, clinical, but tucked inside was a photograph. Willow, now stronger and larger, tumbling in the snow with another young bear. Her coat was shinier. Her eyes brighter. She looked happy. Owen stared at the photo for a long time, a soft smile tugging at his lips. He placed it on the mantel, beside the only other photograph he kept there, a picture of his wife, taken during their last camping trip together. Two souls he had loved deeply in different ways. One gone forever. One still growing. As spring bloomed across the forest, the cabin came alive again. Fresh herbs in the window. New firewood stacked neatly outside. And in the evenings, Owen would sit by the fire, now lit more for comfort than for heat, and read aloud from the journals. Sometimes he imagined Willow still there, head resting on his knee. Sometimes he felt her mother just beyond the trees, watching with the same solemn grace she had shown that winter night she stepped onto his porch and changed everything. The forest had given him a gift. Not just the chance to save a life, but the chance to remember what it meant to live one. And every time the wind rustled through the pines or the snow whispered across the roof, he whispered back, "I remember. Always."